July 4th, 1943, 0900 hours. Rendova Island, Solomon Islands. A 22-year-old Marine crouched behind a wall of sandbags and stared at the sky as 16 Japanese Betty bombers broke through the clouds over Blanche Channel. 2 days earlier, this very same bomber group had killed 59 Americans on the beach below him. Now they were coming back. Same planes, same mission. But this time, Private First Class Evan Evans was ready. He and his gun crew had exactly 27 minutes to change the outcome of the war in this tiny corner of the Pacific. The Japanese had no idea what waited for them. They didn't know the Americans had stayed up all night repairing their radar using pieces from 3 destroyed sets. They didn't know the big 90mm anti-aircraft guns were finally connected to a fire control system that actually worked. And they didn't know that the place Marines had nicknamed Suicide Point was no longer helpless. The real question that morning wasn't whether Evans would fire his gun. It was far simpler. How many of the 16 bombers would make it back to their base at Rabaul? By the time the fighting was over, the sky itself would hold the answer, written in long black trails of smoke. 3 weeks earlier, Evans had never heard of Rendova. Richmond, Indiana felt like another planet. He'd worked in a factory before the war, building machine parts with the same precision he now used to calculate firing solutions. His older brother joined the Army. Evans joined the Marines out of spite. Sibling rivalry that put him on a troop ship heading to the Solomon Islands. The 9th Defense Battalion landed on Rendova June 30th, 1943. The mission was simple on paper: protect the beachhead while artillery shelled Japanese positions on New Georgia across the channel. The Japanese held Munda Airfield on New Georgia, the primary airbase in the central Solomons. Take Munda, and you controlled the skies. Lose Rendova, and the entire campaign collapsed. The battalion brought 12 90mm M1 anti-aircraft guns, 4 guns per battery, 3 batteries total. Each gun weighed nearly 9 tons and could fire a 24-pound shell to 43,500 feet. Maximum rate of fire with the M8A1 spring rammer, 20 rounds per minute. On paper, they were supposed to create an umbrella of flak that no Japanese plane could penetrate. In reality, they became target practice. The Marines called the northern tip of Rendova Suicide Point. Evans learned why on July 2nd. July 2nd, 1943, 1400 hours. 18 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers materialized over Blanche Channel. There was no warning. Rendova's SCR-268 radar sets had been knocked offline by a previous raid. A near miss had damaged the antenna array, bent the lobes out of alignment, destroyed the oscilloscope tubes, shattered the calibration. The radar operators had been working blind for 16 hours. Without radar, the gun crews relied on binoculars and prayers. The Bettys came in low, 230 miles per hour at wave-skimming altitude. Each bomber carried 8 250-kilogram bombs. That's 1,760 pounds of high explosives per aircraft. Multiply by 18, 31,680 pounds of death approaching a beachhead that measured barely 2 square miles. Evans was at his gun position when the first bombs hit. The fuel dumps went first. The explosions were massive. Aviation gasoline igniting in a fireball that climbed 300 feet into the air. Then the ammunition depot. Shells cooked off in chains, each explosion triggering the next, creating a cascade of fire that turned the beach into hell. Then they hit the field hospital. Evans watched a Marine medic, Corporal Danny Reeves from Ohio, a guy who'd shared cigarettes with him 3 days ago, run into the flames trying to reach the wounded. The medic made it 10 feet before a secondary explosion threw him backwards. He didn't get up. The official count was clinical: 59 dead, 77 wounded. The reality was chaos. Marines using helmets to scoop sand over burning fuel. Wounded men screaming for morphine that had burned in the medical supply tent. Trucks melting into slag. 4 of the 9th Defense Battalion's gun crews wounded. 2 of the 6 155mm long Tom artillery pieces destroyed, and Evans standing at his gun, ammunition ready, having fired 32 rounds and hit nothing. The Bettys were too fast. The gun directors, Sperry M4 mechanical computers designed for optical tracking, couldn't keep up. By the time the shells reached altitude, the bombers were already banking toward home, their crews laughing, their mission accomplished. That night, Lieutenant Colonel William Sheets gathered what was left of the battalion. He didn't waste words. The radar's destroyed. Parts won't arrive for days, maybe weeks. The Japanese will be back tomorrow, or the next day. They always come back. And gentlemen, if we can't stop them, there won't be enough of us to bury the dead. Evans cleaned his gun until 0300 hours. He made a promise that night. A promise to Corporal Reeves. A promise to the 59 Marines who died. A promise that if the Japanese came back, they wouldn't make it past the guns. He didn't know if he could keep that promise, but he was going to try. Battery C, Gun 3, had a crew of 3. Evan Evans, 22, Richmond, Indiana. The gunner. Quiet, methodical, obsessed with mechanical precision. He'd calculated firing solutions in a notebook by flashlight every night since landing on Rendova. Practice, rehearsal, preparation. Roy Boone, Indianapolis, Indiana. The fuse setter. Former high school baseball pitcher who understood trajectories and leading moving targets. His job? Dial in detonation time to within half-second precision. Get it wrong by even 1 second, and the shell would burst too high or too low. Miss by half a mile. John Gamborowski, 20, Saginaw, Michigan. The loader. Youngest of the crew. Strongest guy in the battery. Could lift 24-pound shells all day without tiring. Joined the Marines the day after Pearl Harbor. Still wrote letters home he never finished. They were kids. All of them were kids. And tomorrow they'd either prove they could shoot down bombers at 10,000 feet with mechanical computers from 1939, or they'd die trying. The rain arrived at 0400 hours. July 3rd. Solid, relentless tropical rain that turned Rendova into a swamp. Marines stood guard duty in water up to their knees. Supplies rotted on the beach. Foxholes became swimming pools. But the rain brought one gift. The Japanese didn't fly in heavy weather. The Bettys couldn't navigate in zero visibility conditions. The 9th Defense Battalion had maybe 12 hours. The radar operators worked through the rain using ponchos to keep components dry. They had 3 SCR-268 radar sets, all damaged, none functional. The SCR-268 operated at 205 MHz with a maximum range of 22 miles under perfect conditions. But these weren't perfect conditions. The system used 2 antennas in a technique called lobe switching. When both antennas showed the same signal strength, you knew you were locked on target, accurate to within 1 degree. But that required calibration, perfect calibration. Sergeant Mike Torres, a radar operator from Texas, had an idea. Strip all 3 damaged units, pool the working components, cannibalize parts, build 1 functional radar from 3 broken ones. It was field repair that violated every Army technical manual. But technical manuals didn't stop Japanese bombers. By midnight, they had something. Not perfect, not even close to factory specifications, but operational. At 0200 hours, they tested it. The radar painted a return on a seagull at 8 miles. The accuracy was rough, plus or minus 200 yards, but it was better than binoculars. At 063700 hours, the rain stopped. By 700 hours, the skies were clearing. By 800 hours, every Marine on Rendova was staring at the horizon, waiting, because everyone knew what came next. 400 miles northwest, at Rabaul, Japanese bomber crews were preparing for the morning mission. Rabaul was the Pearl Harbor of the South Pacific, defended by 367 anti-aircraft guns and 5 airfields. It was the major Japanese naval and air base in the region, launching daily raids against American positions throughout the Solomons. Lieutenant Yamamoto Henji, composite character based on historical records, was 24 years old. He'd flown the July 2nd raid, watched the American beach burn, watched the fuel dumps explode, watched Marines run through flames. It had been easy. Too easy. The Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber had a wingspan of 82 feet, twin 1,850 horsepower engines, and an operational range of 3,100 miles. It could carry 2,200 pounds of bombs at 265 miles per hour, fast enough to outrun American fighters, long enough to strike targets the Americans thought were safe. But the Betty had a fatal flaw. No armor, no protected fuel tanks. Every ounce of weight sacrificed for range and payload. The 1,100-gallon wing tanks were completely exposed. One tracer round could ignite them. Japanese crews called it the flying lighter. Yamamoto knew the risks, but American anti-aircraft fire was notoriously inaccurate. In previous raids across the Pacific, Japanese losses averaged 2 to 3% per mission. Acceptable attrition. Manageable casualties. On the morning of July 4, 1943, Rabaul launched 16 bombers with the expectation of losing 1, maybe 2. They were about to lose 12, and Yamamoto would never see Rabaul again. July 4, 1943, 08:45 hours. The radar operator's voice crackled over the radio. Multiple contacts inbound, bearing 320, distance 120, miles 14,000, speed 270. 16 Betty bombers flying straight down the slot, the central channel between the Solomon Islands that both sides used as an aerial highway to war. Colonel Sheets gave the order, "All batteries, stand to. This is not a drill." Evans loaded shells into the ready rack. Boone checked the fuse setter. Gamborowski flexed his hands, 24-pound shells, and they'd need to fire fast. The 90mm M1 gun sat on its mount like a sleeping giant. 15 feet of barrel, 9 tons of steel, capable of firing to 43,500 feet. But none of that mattered without radar. The radar operators were tracking the Japanese formation with precision now. The rebuilt SCR-268 was feeding data to the gun directors faster than anyone expected. 100 miles out, 90, 80. The Japanese formation split. One group turned toward New Georgia. The other, 16 bombers, 80 fighters as escort, kept coming straight at Rendova. 70 miles. The combat air pad had been pulled north to intercept a different raid. Rendova's guns were alone. 60 miles. Evans watched his gun director, the Sperry M4 mechanical computer, receiving radar data, gears clicking, calculating intercept solutions. The M4 sent electrical signals to the gun mount. Elevation adjusted automatically. Azimuth tracked the moving targets. 50 miles. The Japanese were descending now. 12,000 feet. Attack altitude. At 30 miles, Colonel Sheets' voice came over the radio. "All batteries, commence firing." 12 90mm M1 guns opened up simultaneously. The sound was overwhelming. Each gun fired every 3 seconds, 24-pound projectiles screaming into the sky at 2,800 feet per second. The noise made speech impossible. The muzzle blast knocked dust off sandbags. The concussion hit like a physical force. Evans settled into the rhythm his crew had practiced 10,000 times. Load, ram, set, fire. Boone grabbed a shell. Gamborowski shoved it into the breech. Evans dialed the fuse. The breech closed. The gun fired. The empty casing ejected. 3 seconds. Again. 20 miles out now. The American shells began bursting at altitude. Black puffs of smoke appearing ahead of the Japanese formation. Too far left. The Bettys adjusted course slightly, kept coming. Evans watched through the gun sight as his shells exploded 500 meters from the lead bomber. Close, but not close enough. A 90mm shell had a burst radius of about 50 meters. The Betty had an 82-foot wingspan. A near miss meant nothing. Only direct hits or very close bursts could bring down a bomber that size. 15 miles. The Marines had fired 88 rounds total across all batteries. And then everything changed. At 12 miles, Battery C's gun director locked on to the lead bomber. The radar return was strong, clean. The M4 computer calculated the intercept with unusual precision. Elevation 43 degrees, azimuth 287 degrees, fuse time 18 seconds. Boone dialed it in, Gamborowski loaded, Evans fired. The shell left the barrel at half a mile per second, climbed through 8,000 feet of tropical air, physics and mathematics and human calculation converging at a single point in space and time. 18 seconds. The shell exploded. 200 meters ahead of the lead Betty, the bomber flew straight into the blast. Shrapnel tore through the right engine. The cowling peeled back. Black smoke poured from the nacelle. Flames spread along the wing toward the fuel tanks. The pilot tried to maintain formation. Japanese training and discipline kept them flying straight even as the engine burned. But the fire spread faster than the pilot could react. Within 30 seconds, flames engulfed the entire right wing. The Betty dropped out of formation, losing altitude. The pilot had two choices: reach Rendova and drop his bombs, or turn back toward Japanese territory and hope to crash land somewhere survivable. He turned back. The Betty rolled right, began a shallow descent toward the channel. At 6,000 feet, the right wing separated from the fuselage. The bomber tumbled out of the sky, hit the water 4 miles northwest of Rendova, broke apart on impact. Yamamoto's crew never had a chance. 1 down, 15 to go. The remaining bombers tightened formation. 7 miles now, close enough that Evans could see them without binoculars. Dark crosses against the morning sky. Bomb bay doors opening. Battery C fired again. Battery E joined in. Battery A added their guns to the barrage. The sky filled with black bursts. The Japanese formation disappeared into a cloud of flak. When the smoke cleared, 2 more Bettys were trailing smoke. One had lost its tail section. Immediate spin. The bomber corkscrewed toward the ocean, unrecoverable. The pilot didn't even have time to radio Raboul before hitting the water. The second Betty tried to maintain altitude, but was losing power from both engines. Shrapnel had damaged the fuel lines. The engine sputtered, coughed, died. The bomber glided for 30 seconds before physics took over and pulled it down into Blanche Channel. 3 down. And then something happened that no one expected. The Japanese bombardiers released early. They were supposed to fly directly over Rendova before dropping. That was doctrine, that was training. But doctrine didn't account for radar-directed anti-aircraft fire that actually hit targets. The bombardiers panicked. At 6 miles out, they dumped their loads and turned hard west. Bombs fell into empty ocean. Massive geysers of water erupted half a mile from shore. Not a single bomb hit the island. Not one. The Japanese had sent 16 bombers carrying 128,000 pounds of high explosives to destroy Rendova. Instead, they just fed the fish. But Evans didn't stop firing, because the Japanese were running now, but they were still in range. The battalion radio net erupting with voices. Battery E to command. We've got a smoking Betty heading west at 8 miles. Confirmed splash on the lead bomber. Radar operator. Contact bearing 295, altitude 7,000, speed 280. Colonel Sheets, all batteries track and engage. Do not let them escape. Battery A, we need more ammunition at gun 2. Battery C, gun 3 engaging target bearing 287. Splash 2, bomber down in the channel. Evans tracked another Betty in the middle of the formation.
The bomber was climbing 9,000 feet, pilot thinking altitude would save him. It didn't. Evans fired twice in quick succession. First shell missed high. Second shell exploded 30 meters behind the bomber's tail. Shrapnel severed the elevator controls. The Betty's nose dropped. The pilot tried to compensate with engine power. The bomber went into a flat spin. 3,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 1,000 feet. The bomber hit the jungle on New Georgia and exploded. 5 down. The gun barrel was glowing red. Evans could see heat waves rising from the metal. The crew had fired 42 rounds in 7 minutes. The barrel temperature was approaching critical levels, over 500 degrees Fahrenheit. Too hot, and the rifling would warp. The gun would become inaccurate. But there was no time to let it cool. The Japanese weren't waiting. 2 more Bettys heading northwest together, flying low 5,000 feet, trying to stay under the radar. It didn't work. Rendova's SCR-268 could track targets down to 3,000 feet. Battery C took the lead bomber. Battery E took the trailer.
Both guns fired within seconds. Both scored hits. The lead Betty took a direct hit to the port engine. The engine exploded. Not just smoke, but actual detonation. Metal fragments tore through the wing structure. The wing folded upward. The bomber rolled inverted and went straight down into Blanche Channel. The second Betty lost its tail section. The aircraft flew for 8 more seconds. Physics and momentum carrying it forward even though it was already dead. Then, it entered an uncontrollable dive and hit the water at 280 miles per hour. 7 down. The sky over Rendova was filled with smoke now. Burning aircraft debris falling into the ocean. Oil slicks spreading across the water, catching sunlight, making rainbow patterns over the graveyard. 9 Japanese bombers remained, scattered across a 10-mile radius. No formation, no coordination. Just individual pilots trying to survive. 3 Bettys turned due west, heading for open ocean, abandoning the mission, running for home. But home was 400 miles away, and they had to cross 200 miles of ocean that was now filling with American shells. Battery C tracked the nearest bomber, range 8 miles, altitude 7,000 feet, speed 280 miles per hour. The bomber was running at full power, probably burning fuel at twice the normal rate. The crew would be lucky to make it halfway to Rabaul before running dry. They didn't get the chance. Evans fired 3 rounds. The third exploded directly underneath the Betty's fuselage. The blast tore through the bomb bay, and the Betty hadn't dropped all its ordnance. 500-pound bombs detonated inside the aircraft. The explosion was massive, so large that Marines on the beach actually cheered. Pieces of the bomber scattered across half a mile of ocean. 8 down. If you made it this far, you're the reason channels like ours can keep the past alive. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Drop a like and subscribe so these voices from history continue to be heard. These Marines changed warfare itself, and they deserve to be remembered. Evans swung his gun to track another Betty heading due north. Maximum range, 12 miles out. The bomber was at 11,000 feet and climbing. The pilot figured out altitude was his only chance. Get high enough, and American shells couldn't reach him. But 11,000 feet was well within 90-millimeter range. The M1 could fire effectively to 43,500 feet. This bomber was barely a quarter of that. Evans elevated the gun to maximum. Fired. The shell climbed for 22 seconds, exploded 200 meters ahead of the bomber. The pilot saw the burst and turned hard right, directly into the next shell. The blast hit the cockpit. The canopy shattered, the Betty's nose disintegrated. The aircraft tumbled out of control and fell into the ocean 9 miles north of Rendova. 9 down. By 0930, the sky was clearing. Of the 16 Betty bombers that had approached Rendova, only 4 were still flying. They were heading northwest at maximum speed, climbing, running. The Zero escort had already abandoned them and fled back toward Rabaul. Evans tracked one of the retreating bombers, range 12 miles. The bomber was at 14,000 feet, on the edge of the flak zone. Evans fired anyway. The shell arced through the sky, exploded 300 meters from the bomber. Too far for a kill, but close enough to send a message. Rendova wasn't Suicide Point anymore. It was a killing ground. The ceasefire order came at 0932, 27 minutes after first radar contact. The guns fell silent. The sudden quiet was almost painful after the continuous roar of the 90mm cannons. Evans stepped back from his gun. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from exhaustion. His ears rang so badly he could barely hear. The gun crew collapsed against the sandbags. They'd been firing non-stop for 27 minutes. The gunner's log showed 53 rounds fired from Battery C, Gun 3 alone. Across Rendova, the 12 90mm guns had expended 88 rounds total. 88 shells to engage 16 bombers. By 10:30, the radar operators confirmed what the gun crews already knew. 4 Japanese bombers had escaped. 4 out of 16. That meant 12 had gone down. 12 bombers destroyed in 27 minutes. The 9th Defense Battalion had just set a record. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific had ever achieved that kill ratio. Not at Guadalcanal, not at Midway, not anywhere. 12 bombers with 88 rounds meant a hit rate of nearly 14%. Most anti-aircraft units were happy with 2%. By 10:30, work parties were recovering debris from the water. Pieces of Japanese aircraft washing up on the beach. Engine cowlings with Japanese markings. Wing sections with the red circles still visible. A tail assembly floating intact. Personal items, a flight helmet, a photograph of a Japanese family, a logbook with kanji writing. Marines stood on the beach staring at the debris field spreading across 5 miles of ocean. Oil slicks caught the sunlight. Smoke rose from floating wreckage. Bodies floated in the water. Some wearing life vests, some not. Some Marines felt pride. They'd won. They'd stopped the attack. They'd saved American lives. Others felt something heavier, something harder to name. Shooting down 12 bombers meant killing more than 100 Japanese aircrew. Some had survived the crashes. Some had parachuted into the ocean. Some struggled in the water while American ships steamed past without stopping. War had rules, but sometimes the rules didn't matter. A chaplain stood on the beach and said a prayer for the living and the dead on both sides. Evans stared at the wreckage and felt nothing, or maybe he felt too much and nothing was easier.
At Rabaul, Japanese commanders were receiving reports from the 4 bombers that escaped. The reports were alarming. The Americans had radar-directed anti-aircraft fire. Accurate radar. The kind that could track bombers through clouds and guide shells to within meters of the target. That meant every Japanese airbase in the Solomons had just become vulnerable. On July 5th, Rabaul sent just 6 bombers to attack Rendova. Only 6. They came in at night, high altitude, dropped bombs from 20,000 feet, missed the island completely. The 90mm guns fired 37 rounds, claimed 2 hits. On July 6th, the Japanese tried again. 4 bombers. Same result. By July 10th, Japanese air raids on Rendova had stopped almost entirely. The Japanese had effectively conceded the airspace over Rendova to American anti-aircraft guns. With Rendova secure, the 155mm long-tom artillery batteries could fire without interruption. They pounded Japanese positions on New Georgia 24 hours a day. Munda Airfield fell on August 5, 1943. The airfield that had been the primary Japanese airbase in the Central Solomons was now in American hands. Marine and Army engineers had it operational within 72 hours. American fighters were flying missions from Munda by August 14th. The campaign that started with the Rendova landings on June 30th was over in 5 weeks. One gun crew, 27 minutes, 12 bombers. And suddenly, the Japanese lost air superiority over the Central Solomons. At 1500 hours, July 4th, a photographer from the Marine Corps Combat Camera Unit arrived at Battery C. He wanted pictures of the gun crew that scored the most kills. Evans, Boone, and Gamborowski stood beside their 90mm gun. 3 Marines who just made history. The photographer took 6 pictures. Only one survived the war. It ended up in the National Archives as Photo 127GW. The caption read, "This is one of the anti-aircraft guns which wiped out a Japanese bomber fleet of 12 planes in a single day at Rendova Island." Evans was promoted to corporal in October 1943. Boone made corporal in December. Gamborowski stayed private first class until January 1944. The promotions came with citations, official recognition, but no medals. Defense Battalion personnel rarely received medals for anti-aircraft work. Shooting down planes was considered routine duty. The 9th Defense Battalion moved to New Georgia in October, then to Guam in July 1944. They defended airfields, shot down 6 more aircraft. Their total for the war reached 46 confirmed kills. July 4, 1943, remained their best day. 12 kills in 1 engagement. No American anti-aircraft unit in the Pacific ever matched that record. Evans re-enlisted in 1948, served through the Korean War, made staff sergeant, left the Marine Corps in 1953. 11 years of service, 2 wars. He worked as a machinist after that, married, had children, lived a quiet life in Richmond, Indiana. But he was never the same after Rendova. He worked with precision tools, still calculating trajectories in his head. His children asked about the war. He said almost nothing. What was there to say? We shot down 12 bombers, killed over 100 Japanese airmen. Some probably drowned while we steamed past. I never talked about it. What could I say that would make sense to people who weren't there? Most veterans didn't talk. The ones who'd been there knew what happened. The ones who hadn't been there wouldn't understand. So Evans kept quiet, worked his job, raised his family, lived his life. Until 1993, 50 years after Rendova. In 1993, Evan Evans was 72 years old. He wrote a letter to the National Archives in College Park, Maryland. The letter was simple. He was looking for a photograph of a 90mm gun. Any photo would do. He wanted to show his grandchildren what the gun looked like. Alan Walker, an archivist, received the letter. He spent half a day searching, found plenty of photos of M1 guns. But something about the letter stayed with him. He read it again. Evans mentioned Rendova, mentioned July 4, 1943, mentioned setting a record for shooting down Japanese bombers. He went back to the archives, searched under Rendova, Series 127GW, combat photographs from the New Georgia campaign. He found it on the 4th page. 3 Marines standing beside a 90mm gun. The caption identified them. Private First Class Evan Evans, 22, Richmond, Indiana. Private Roy E. Boone,
Indianapolis, Indiana. Private First Class John S. Gamborofsky, 20, Saginaw, Michigan. Walker sent the photograph to Evans. The response came 2 weeks later. Evans had never known the photo existed. He'd never expected anyone remembered. Seeing himself at 22 years old, standing beside the gun that made history, brought back 50 years of memories he'd tried to forget. He wrote Walker thanking him, said it meant more than Walker could know, said he'd carried Rendova with him every day for 50 decades, said maybe now he could let some of it go. Evans died in 2004 at age 83. Boone had died in 1998. Gamborofsky passed away in 2006. The gun crew that made history on July 4, 1943 is gone. But the story survived. The photograph survived. The official record survived. The 9th Defense Battalion's achievement at Rendova became part of Marine Corps history, part of the larger story of how American forces learned to defeat Japanese air power in the Pacific. The lessons from Rendova spread throughout the theater. Radar-directed anti-aircraft fire became standard procedure. Gun crews trained on the integration techniques the 9th Defense Battalion had pioneered. Kill ratios improved across the board. Japanese bombers faced increasingly deadly defensive fire at every American position. By 1944, Japanese daylight bombing raids had become rare. By 1945, they'd stopped almost entirely. The Japanese couldn't replace their losses fast enough, couldn't train new crews fast enough. The mathematics that Evans and Battery C demonstrated on July 4, 1943, had scaled across the entire Pacific. 12 bombers shot down in 27 minutes, 88 shells fired, 90% destruction rate. Those numbers proved something fundamental. American technology, when it worked, could beat Japanese tactics. Precision mattered more than firepower. Training mattered more than numbers. 3 Marines with a functioning radar and a 90mm gun could change the course of war. The beach at Rendova is quiet now. The guns are gone. The bunkers have collapsed. The jungle has reclaimed most of the positions where the 9th Defense Battalion fought. But the mathematics survived. The lesson survived. On July 4th every year, a few people remember the day the planes fell. Remember Evan Evans and Roy Boone and John Gamborofsky. Remember that 3 young Marines changed air defense in the Pacific. They proved that Suicide Point could become something else, a graveyard for the enemy instead of Americans. They proved that precision beats chaos. They proved that courage under fire can rewrite the mathematics of war itself. The Japanese sent 16 bombers to destroy an island. Instead, they taught the Americans how to own the sky. And in 27 minutes of thunder and smoke and screaming steel, the tide turned. Not because of superior numbers, not because of better equipment, because 3 Marines refused to let their friends die for nothing. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Every single like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. We're rescuing forgotten stories from dusty archives every single day. Stories about gunners and radar operators and Marines who held the line with precision and courage. Drop a comment right now. Tell us where you're watching from. United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Australia. Our community stretches across the world. You're not just a viewer. You're part of keeping these memories alive. Thank you for watching. Thank you for making sure Evan Evans and his crew don't disappear into silence. These Marines deserve to be remembered, and you're helping make that happen.